a question that actually appears on the AP test every year, but it's not actually this question that's going to be on the exam for this year. But what I want to tell you about the question is it has a lot of influence on the part writing questions that we're going to experience on the AP exam. So it has important information for us regarding how we apply the principles of part writing to the part writing questions, as well as this question on the regular AP test. So I'm going to be talking about question number 7. This is certainly a part of our AP curriculum. Before we do that, let's go back to the assignment that I gave you, and it was this scavenger hunt, another scavenger hunt like the one we did with the Count Carmen overture or prelude. So this was a piece called Sarabande. I have to say that I'm not positive who the composer of this piece was, but nevertheless, it gave us an opportunity or some opportunities to go on a little scavenger hunt again. And we were asked to find passing tones. I asked you to find a 7/6 suspension, a half cadence, temporary keys like we did with Carmen, harmony on the second beat of measure 20, hemiola. Hopefully you studied or you came across hemiola this year in your classes. And of course, what kind of non-chord tone, the final note in measure 23. So I wrote them all out to save us some time. The first question, of course, was find examples of passing tones in the violin part. Well, I gave you about 4 of them there. The first one, you can, let's look at the first one and explain how passing tones work. The chord is an A major chord, A, C sharp, E, and that half note goes into the second beat, of course, and even over into the third beat. So this A, C sharp, E happens throughout this measure. But in the second beat in the violin part, there is a B. And so that's a non-chord tone. And you can see that it passes between the C sharp and the A. Okay, down farther, that same passing tone is in bar 17. You can see down there in 17 in the third system. The measure before that has a passing tone that moves between G sharp and E in that E, G sharp, B chord, because that's an F sharp. And then there's another one in bar 13, the G sharp that goes between F sharp and A. So those are passing tones. The second thing was find a 7/6 suspension toward the beginning of the piece in the violin part. So here we go with that one. The second beat of that measure, as you can see, is a G sharp, B, D chord. And the B is in the violin a chord tone right there. But then the chord changes to a C sharp, E, G sharp chord. And now B is not a chord tone. So it is suspended into the next chord. And now it's a non-chord tone. And then it resolves down to A, which is the resolution, okay? And if you know about suspensions, hopefully you do, then the B is a 7th above the C sharp, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And then the A is 6 above that bass note C sharp. So that is the 7/6 suspension. The third thing was find a half cadence in the tonic key. Well, hopefully that one was pretty easy for you. It's at bar 8A there. You can see where I wrote half cadence. And the key of the piece is A major, of course. And this is an E, G sharp, B chord. And so that is the 5 chord in the key of A major. And before that is a 1 chord in bar 7, the A, C sharp, E chord. So that's a 1 chord to a 5 chord, a half cadence. Number 4 in our scavenger hunt list was what other key is temporarily implied in measures 11 to 12? Well, there is the first thing that catches my eye is that A sharp. And so A sharp is like leading tone to B. So that was my first hint that maybe this is implying the key of B minor. And then that A sharp stays around, and you can see that the dominant in B minor would be B, D, F sharp, okay? And so then you have an F sharp leading to, you know, still with that A sharp in there, and it's a B, D, F sharp. So that would be the one chord in B minor in bar 12. Hopefully everybody followed my discussion there. So the implied key is B minor. And then the harmony on the second beat of measure 20 down there at the bottom system, the second bar in that bottom system. Well, of course, you have to spell the chord out. And here's the way you do it. There's a D in the bass note, in the bass clef. There is an E and a G sharp on that second count, and also a B. So when you unscramble those and put them all together, that is an E, G sharp, B, D chord, and it is the 5 chord in the key of A major, and it's a 7th chord, and the chordal 7th, D, is in the bass. So that is a 5, 4, 2 in the tonic key, the key of A major. And finally, we're going to talk about the end of the piece there with hemiola. Hemiola changes the stress of the beats in music. And so it often happens at cadence points like this. So I've marked off how the stress has changed. And you see we're in 3/4, it's been going along 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And all of a sudden it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So it almost changes it like the stress of a 3/2 bar, like 3 half notes. And that is hemiola, changing the flow, changing the stress. Finally, the non-chord tone, the final note in measure 23, well, you see that that is an E, G sharp, B chord, and A is not in that chord, but it anticipates being in the final chord because it becomes a member of the chord when it moves to 24A, it says there. So that's called an anticipation. Dum, bum, bum. And you know, where it's dum, bum, it's a non-chord tone in the E, G sharp, B chord, but then it becomes a chord tone in the A, C sharp, E chord. All right, so that's our scavenger hunt with Sarabande. Hopefully you had some fun looking for those things, and hopefully you found them all. So let's go on. I played this with flute rather than violin because the violin doesn't sound good electronically. We're on 6 now, 7. And it could be. There's the 7/6 suspension. Now we're at 9. Here comes B minor. Feel that kind of changing flow of the stresses. All right, nice little piece. Okay, so today we're going to demystify free response question 7. And question 7 is actually the last thing that we talk about oftentimes in preparation for AP tests this time of the year, but it has such a strong influence on our tests this year, which we're going to be doing part writing from figured bass and from Roman numerals. I think this melodic harmonization question is really like a puzzle. It's a step-by-step process, and there are reliable formulas that play into completing this kind of exercise of harmonizing a melody. The first thing that we need to understand is what the actual task is in our AP world. And that has to do with doing part writing in 18th century style, music of the common practice. I like to connect the written and the oral. In other words, I like to sing melodies and they give you clues for how you would harmonize it. And of course, we do have to understand common practice harmonic progression, what chords go to what chords and so on. An important part of harmonizing melodies is cadences, writing cadences. We'll talk about that just a little bit more in a few moments. Economy of harmonic materials, using chords that are simple and easy to work with when harmonizing melodies. And we're going to look at an old question 7, the 2013, but it is still very much like the harmonizations that we do today in 2020. How FR7 influences our part writing questions we'll talk about. And of course, we're going to part write the alto and tenor of the 2013 FR7, because actually when you harmonize the melody, typically what's asked is just the bass line and the harmonies. You don't have to write the alto and tenor, but in our world this year, we're going to write the harmonies by finishing out the alto and tenor voices as well. And then we'll have a little summary and review at the end. So let's talk about this. Here's one way of harmonizing a melody. This is called a lead sheet. And some people use fake books when they're playing gigs and that sort of thing. And this is a lot from the jazz world, the rock and roll world. But I gave you an example of one here. This is a song called All of Me. The words aren't here, the lyrics. It's just the chords that would harmonize this melody. And so I played it off electronically, and I just use one chord for every 2 measures. You can see the little sign, the diagonal with the 2 dots on either side that says play the same chord. And so really it's one chord for every 2 measures. Listen to this. It's just the A section to save us time. So an A7 now, and a D minor, E7, and A minor. That's what that little minus means. And a D7. So you get the idea. This is a way that you can harmonize melodies using chord symbols. That's very much a part of the 21st century that we live in. Okay. This is like I would play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for my little granddaughter, who's 5 years old. And that way she can sing it, and she does. But this is all 1s, 4s, and 5s. And I just kind of chord it out always. I'm not going to play that one because you can see what it sounds like. So another just chording type of harmonization like we saw in the jazz tune. And then there are these kind. This is a Mozart piece. It's a theme and variations, And you can see the theme there. Ta 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 ta. Okay, so I mean, he is using Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but you can see he plays it out, the theme, very simply at the beginning, but then look at the first variation. Already all kinds of things going on in the harmonization of that melody. And he goes through, I can't remember exactly how many variations there are, but this is a wonderful little piece, À vous dirai-je maman. And I would encourage you to look on iTunes or whatever you use, Spotify and those, to find a recording of this and listen to it. It's a wonderful little piece. Okay, so this is more the way that we're going to talk about harmonizing melodies. So the three most important chords, the 1, the 4, and the 5. These are the primary triads in music. And really, they are the predominant chords often that happen in music. The question is, can you harmonize melodies with these chords? Can you just do it with the 1, the 4, and the 5? Well, you know, I always like to kind of make the analogy of my golf game with regard to this. You know, I have to tell you that when I show up on the first tee at the golf course, I mean, I'm impressive. I look very good. You know, I've got nice clothes. My golf shoes are great. My clubs, oh my goodness, my clubs. This is like the primary triads in music, you know, but I've got all kind of clubs. You know, I've got a rescue club. I've got my metal woods. I've got all the irons, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've got probably 2 wedges. Sometimes I change my putter out. And then I start to play off the first tee. And I start using all those clubs and whoa, out into the trees, into the water, over the green. I mean, probably if I would just cut back to 3 clubs, like the primary triads in music, I would do a lot better out there on the golf course. I'm probably going to try that next time. You know, just take my rescue club. It has a great name, by the way, because it's rescued me oftentimes out of the trees and other things. Just maybe a 5-iron and a putter. That's all you need. And the primary triads are really all you need to harmonize melodies oftentimes. I'll show you how. Also, using chords mostly in root position. You will need a couple of other chords for this particular question. FR7 on the AP exam that we're not including this year. Like the cadential 6/4, the 1/6/4, the 2 or 2/7, and of course the secondary dominant, which we've already talked about this year. And so that's something that's a part of your music literacy now, I hope. Okay. Step 1 in harmonizing this melody is to harmonize the cadences, and certainly simplest endings are best. So we want to use the most common cadences, and those would be the authentic cadence and the half cadence. And the authentic, you can use both perfect authentic and imperfect authentic, and of course the half cadence. Would we need a deceptive cadence? Not really. Now, you could probably write one, that's fine, but the fact of the matter is you don't need to, okay? Cadences in the order of common use. Of course, the authentic would be the first one that you would see being used. And take a look at this. Here's what, if you saw this in the melody, this is what you would write in for the cadence. And that is, if you saw mi, re, do in the melody, or do, ti, do, or sol, ti, do, those would work with a cadential 6/4 to a 5 or 5/7 to a 1. So you look at the melody and you see what the melody is doing, and you're able to ascribe harmonies to those melody notes. If you saw la, ti, do, or I should say heard la, ti, do in the melody la, ti, do, that could be a 2 or a 2/6 to a 5 to a 1. If you also saw la, ti, do, it could be a 4 to a 5 to a 1. And do, ti, do would also work for that. Then the half cadence. If a phrase ends on re or scale degree 2, that's going to be a half cadence. It's a 5. So see, I said reliable formulas. If the melody says this, the harmony says this, and it works very well. And I have to tell you, that works in jazz and rock and roll as well. And then re to T and fi to so. Re to T would work for a 2 to a 5. Fi to so is that secondary dominant that we have talked about. Okay, writing cadences. Now, what I did here, I tell you what, I'm going to go over to the document camera and show you some of this. This is a worksheet that I use in my class, and hopefully you can see that okay. And we practice writing cadences like this. And I think this is a great thing to practice, because even though we're harmonizing a melody right now, these kind of cadences appear in the part writing as well. So you kind of get used to it. Of course, there we're given the bass line, and we would have to come up with the melody. And so knowing what these look like will be really helpful to you on the AP exam this year. So for example, we talked about this just a moment ago. Here is a 3-2-1, mi, re, do. And we're in the key of G major, okay? So 1 sharp in the key signature. And so 3-2-1, well, that was that formula we could just plug in. That would be a cadential 6-4, like this, to a 5, or a 5-7, you could call it a 5-7, and then to a 1, okay, like so, cadential 6-4. And of course, the bass notes then, this is what might be given this year for us, would be D, D, and then I'm going to go in contrary motion up to G. And you might want to think about that when you're writing the soprano, alto, and tenor from a bass line, thinking about that contrary motion going into. Look at this. Now we're in the key of E flat. Okay, we're in the key of E flat. Here it is again, 3-2-1. So that would be a 1-6-4, but now we're in the key of E flat, 1-6-4 to a 5 to a 1. Again, it could be a 5-7 if you want it. And so in the key of E flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat. So this would be B flat. This is so, so, do. So let's say on your part writing and you saw so, so, do in the Roman, you saw in the, and then this is going to E flat right there, okay? In contrary motion again. Well, let's say on your part writing, if you saw 1, 6, 4, 5 to 1 in the Roman numerals, then you would know what the melody might be, you know, and it wouldn't have to be a perfect authentic cadence. It might be a 5-4-3-2, you know, that could work as well. All right. And then, for instance, here's one up here. Let's look at this one. That ends on the 2nd scale degree in G major. So immediately I would put a 5 under that. And if there's a 5 in your Roman numeral on the AP test this year, I would put a re in the melody, see if it's about how that might work. Now, it's not always going to be that way, but knowing how to work these cadences and all can really broaden your horizons about being able to write those part writing exercises from figure bass or Roman numerals. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint over here and go on. So step 2, I call it connect the dots. And that's writing out the harmony for the rest of the phrases, the part that comes before the cadence. I'll show you in just 1 second. We want to keep this simple, and we want to use those chords, primarily the primary triads, 1s, 4s, and 5s. You can see you might want a 2. And in fact, in this exercise we're going to do, I did use a 2, and you'll see, okay? So set each cadence up with a preparation chord. For instance, a cadential 6-4 before 5 to 1, a 1, 2, or 4 before a 5, or a 5 of 5 in this case. Start a phrase with a root position 1 if possible. Now that's going to be prescribed for you on the test this year, so you won't have to worry about it. Second option might be starting a phrase with a 5. 5 likes to go to 1. 4 likes to go to 2, or 1 or 5. 2 likes to go to 5. A raised fourth scale degree is probably a 5 of 5. Use contrary motion. This is important for writing this year on the 2 part writing exercises. Use plenty of contrary motion and oblique motion for that matter. Look at the melody and pay attention to notes on the strong beats, okay? So that's all going to be given to you this year. Here's the exercise. This was from 2013. And this is what a free response question 7 looks like, melodic harmonization. I always like to sing the melody, do, mi, re, do, ti, la, ti, do. I know I'm not in B flat. Do, ti, do, re, mi, fi, so. But it's early for me, so I have to keep it low. Mi, la, sol, fa, mi, re. Do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do. So you see, when I sang that, first of all, you see that altered tone in the measure where it says start here. And that, of course, is going to be a 5 of 5. You notice that the second measure at the bottom under the fermata there is C, and that, of course, is the second scale degree. So you're going to put a 5 under that one to harmonize it, and then there are 3, 2, 1 ending. So write the chords of the cadence in first. There's the 5 of 5, secondary dominant. You won't have that on the test this year, going to a 5. Then down on the bottom, it's 1 to 5. And then ending is 5 to 1. And we can put cadential 6/4 before that 5 to 1. Over here, the preparation chord I put before that 1 to 5 is a 4. I went 4, 1, 5, all in root position, notice. And then this one up here, where the arrow is, where it says start here, that one is, if you look at the bass note in the 5/6 chord right before that last measure, it is the leading tone, A, in the key of B flat major. So that one had to go to B flat on the next note on the downbeat underneath the arrow. And then it went up. Now I'm just going to show you how I harmonized the melody. And I want you to notice, first of all, that it's all primary triads except for 1, 2 chord. Okay, it's all 1s, 4s, and 5s. I did that on purpose in this one. And you might look at this and say, wow, that bass line is really disjunct. It doesn't have hardly any conjunct stepwise motion. And you know what? That's okay. I've been a bass all of my life as a singer. And you know what? This sounds like a bass line to me. Now, it may not be the most exciting bass line ever, but I think when you hear it, you're going to think, yeah, that sounds like a bass line. Let's listen. So I hope you feel like me, that sounds okay. It sounds like a bass line. We might probably want to try and smooth it out a little bit, but I just wanted to show you that you can be simple, like my golf game needs to be. You can just use primary triads. You can use root position chords. And there was no case of any parallels that would have been a problem. There was a lot of similar motion in that second phrase up at the top of the page, the third and fourth measures. So there had to be a little bit of an adjustment there. And I'll show you what the adjustments are when we part write this. Okay, so let's move on. And so I am going to show you how I added the alto and tenor in. And so this is going to be the completed part writing in 4 parts. It's just in the reverse of what we're going to do on the AP test. Instead of having a bass line that we're going to write the soprano, alto, and tenor for, which is what we're going to do on the AP test, this one was doing it in reverse, but the process is still the same. And adding the alto and tenor is still the same process. So that's why I wanted to show this to you, because harmonizing melodies is certainly a big part of what we do in music too. Whether or not you're a composer or if you are going to perform, these are important things in our music literacy. So let's look at the first phrase. There are 4 phrases, as you saw from the bass line that I just wrote to go with the melody on that earlier question, okay? And this is the same question. I did make a couple of changes when I started adding the alto and tenor in, just to make the voice leading work maybe a little better, okay? So here's the first phrase, and let's draw it out of there and look at it more closely, okay? So I wrote down the chords for you. This is all 1 and 4 and 5, except for that 7 diminished 6. This phrase was given in the original question, but I put in the alto and tenor parts with this soprano and bass line. So look at the alto part. It's all conjunct, stepwise motion. And I know that the altos in the audience would say, oh man, that is a boring alto part. But actually it's correct. It is a correct alto voice. And that voice has a life of its own too, because without that voice, it wouldn't make this sound like it's going to sound. Now the tenor made a couple of skips, little ones, the third down from the D to the B flat, and again from the D down to the B flat, but then it's stepwise, right? Stepping up the scale, and there's the passing tones in the soprano voice and the bass voice aren't a part of the chords. So here's what this one sounds like with the completed 4 parts. All right, nice. Let's go to the second phrase, okay? If you look at the chords, this is all 1 and 5. Now, there were some, let's take a look at this one closer. There were some accommodations that I had to make with the alto and tenor in this, especially because that similar motion was happening, and the soprano is completely stepwise. It's completely conjunct. So that meant that one of the inside voices, in fact, both of the inside voices in this case, had to make some accommodations. Now, I want to tell you that if I could write everything stepwise in the alto and tenor, I would try to do it. I really would. In this particular case, it just wasn't possible at this juncture. But if I'm trying on the AP test, I want to make the alto and tenor parts very, very conjunct. Okay. So on this one, notice that we had to first of all go up a third in the tenor. The alto starts out really very good with all Fs going along, and then the tenors, they have to go up a third to F from the D, okay? Then across the bar line, notice that the alto went up to B flat, so it went up a fourth. That's like so to do, though. That's a very common movement, probably more so in the bass line than alto lines, but I had to make that move to make that happen. And, in this particular case, rather than doubling, rather than not doubling the B flat, I doubled it. It's default doubling. So the B flat is in the alto and the bass, and the third is in the soprano, and the fifth is in the tenor, okay? And then moving to the secondary dominant now the alto's fine. They're going to be conjunct the rest of the way, but the tenor has to move down a fourth from F down to C, and that makes it work out really, really nicely. And then they end on the C. Let's listen to this one. So that really sounded nice with that conjunct motion in the soprano and in the bass for that making similar motion. Okay, let's go to the third phrase. So the third phrase has all 1, 4, and 5s. Okay, ones, couple of 4s, couple of 5s, and those 1s. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so this one again had a couple of third moves, but basically pretty conjunct. And all root position chords. I did start the B flat at the beginning of this in the 1 chord, the very first chord in this phrase. I began the B flat down the octave, and I think in my earlier one, I had it up the octave, but it doesn't matter. This just makes better movement, and kind of sounds good because it ends back up over there at the end on this B flat, the lower one. Okay, one thing I want to call your attention to in this phrase is that E flat in the soprano, the passing tone. It sets up a tritone between the A up to the E flat, okay? And so that tritone needs to resolve correctly. So the A needed to go to the B flat, and the E flat needed to go down to the D. The tritone resolves inward like that. And so what that caused was I had to triple the root in that 1 chord on the fourth beat of that measure. So we've got 3 B flats and a D. And that's happens in common practice all the time. Sometimes it happens at cadence points, but it also happens in the middle of phrases like this one did. And then the rest of the way takes us stepwise. This sounds like this. Good. And then the last phrase. Here's where I used a 2, and I made it a 7th chord, a 2-7. And then, of course, the cadential 6-4-5-1 on the end. Here's what this one looked like. Interestingly, in the 2-7, the chordal 7th should resolve down by step in the next chord. It can't do that because there's not an A in the next chord because it's the cadential 6-4, and that is dominant function, but it uses the notes of the 1 chord, okay? And then you can see that the cadential 6-4, 6 above F would be F, G, A, B, C, D, and B flat, I should have said. And that's the 6, and it moves down. And then 4 above is B flat, and of course it moves down to the 3rd above that F, okay? So let's take a look. The B flat had to hold until it could resolve down in the 5 chord. And there finally the chordal 7th is resolved. So let's listen to this final phrase. It was all conjunct in the alto and tenor except those thirds at the beginning of the alto part, but thirds are fine. But try and make everything as conjunct as you can. Here it comes. All right, so there is the completed part writing, adding the alto and tenor in there. So let's hear what the whole thing sounds like. Yeah, so for me, even with all root position chords, this is really a nice four phrase in 4-part writing, and it worked out really, really quite nicely, if I do say so myself. Okay, and you can do it too. Okay, let's look at some of the things that we've talked about today. Okay, I'm gonna need to make this where I can see that well. Okay, so melodic harmonization is simply the opposite of part writing from given bass lines. The same principles of part writing hold true for both procedures. That's why I wanted to show you this question 7 that normally appears on the AP exam, because it's the same thing as the 2 that we're going to experience on the exam. It's just the opposite. It's harmonizing the melody rather than harmonizing the bass lines. And melodic harmonization is what many composers did. For instance, Johann Sebastian Bach, he had all of these melodies that he harmonized all of the time. The harmony, the third bullet, the harmony is either prescribed by given bass lines from figured bass, symbols, or Roman numerals. That's what we're going to experience on the AP test, or it's suggested by the melody and can be creative based on the style. In other words, jazz, like we heard, common practice, or even other styles. The exercise studied today is true to the principles and guidelines of 18th century style music of the common practice. The question is, do you understand harmonic progression in the common practice style? That means, do you know how to use and write cadences? Do you understand the principles of voice leading? And can you spell the chords correctly? I think if you can, success is going to be yours. So I encourage you to keep looking, keep practicing these things. So I'm going to give you a couple that you can use to practice. And I've given you the bass line and the soprano line because I want you to practice those alto and tenor parts and try your best to make them as conjunct as possible. And if you can, make them completely conjunct, completely stepwise. So I've given you one that is using figured bass, and the other one is using Roman numerals, just like you're going to have on the AP exam, except on the AP exam, all you will have given is the bass lines, or in the case of the Roman numerals, you'll have to figure out the chords that those Roman numerals represent and then write the bass line in. So you on the Roman numeral one, as we've already talked about several times, you'll write all 4 of the parts into the score. And you have to be really, really careful that you know what those Roman numerals mean, okay? So with that said, practice these and we'll talk about the alto and tenors parts, alto and tenor parts when we return, when I return with you on Wednesday. Once again, Mrs. Foote will be here with you tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you again. Practice on your part writing, practice on your sight singing, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Bye now.